this what you were looking for? And then there's this matchup quiz.
Yes.
Okay. Does everybody see
Everybody can see it?
Yep.
Okay. And who did that for me? Was that Dr. Yeager?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I am not technologically savvy. I do the best I can, so I'm grateful. Let me ask you, since you have the document, if you would just take a few minutes to look at what you
Oh.
see on the left side, request for information, and see which one of those items in the right column matches it. Do that on your own, and we can go over it right now when you know, I'll give you like 5 minutes, or if you would prefer, I can do it at the end of our time together. Can you take a few minutes, each of you, to see if you can get those answers?
Sure.
All right, and I'll get my water while you're doing that. Thanks again, Dr. Yeager.
Sure.
There we go.
Okay, were we supposed to collaborate so that this wouldn't take but
No.
5?
Linda.
Hello, I'm trying to be a team player here.
Is that called asking for, what is that day on that TV show? You get to ask for help?
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought it was
Where's
me.
my
I
phone a
thought-
friend?
Call a friend, that's right.
Okay, that wasn't quite 5 minutes.
No.
Oh,
One of the reason that I like to use this and give you an opportunity to look at it is because all of you have participated in meetings. And I know that even before the school board, there are meetings that you've attended and from time to time. Am I correct? Is there anybody that hasn't been going to meetings? Okay. And I know that there are some things about those meetings that you thoroughly enjoy, but I want to ask if you would tell me just one thing about meetings that you find less than positive. One thing. Meetings in general. I'm not saying the school board meetings, but meetings in general. Yes. Anybody?
The length, sometimes, the length of the meetings.
The length, okay,
The lack of action after long discussions.
okay,
Sidebar conversations.
okay. Anybody else?
I think sometimes not knowing what the expected outcome is gonna be. You know, that it's not really clear what you're there for. No clear objective.
All right.
And sometimes people are long-winded.
Yes. Okay. Okay, anything else, anybody? All right. The reason that I ask that is that's what parliamentary procedure is about. And I want you to know
Yeah.
that it is not procedures, it's parliamentary procedure. That's what it's about. It's about helping to make meetings move more expeditiously and be more productive. So do you want me to give you the answers to that right now, or I can do it at the end? Would you like them now?
Yes.
Okay. Request for information, the first one is
Uh-huh.
also known as point of information.
Hmm.
The answer to that, anybody know? Is H. H allows a member to ask a question relevant to business. This is not about procedure, it's about the business.
Okay.
Amend, anybody?
Oh,
Right. Oh, modification to a motion. Parliamentary inquiry. That's J. That's asking a
Oh, okay,
procedural
yeah.
question, okay? Division of the assembly. Anyone?
That's, hold on, let's see.
let's see.
I think somebody's trying to get me to read sign language, but division of the assembly. Are you saying A? I thought I saw it.
I thought Kara
A.
said C.
A.
Okay, it's A.
Oh.
It demands a rising vote after a voice vote. And what it means is the person is saying, the chair said that the ayes have it, I'm not feeling that. So you do a rising vote. Okay, rescind or amend something previously adopted.
M.
N.
That's N.
And
N.
Strikes or modifies the motion adopted at a prior meeting. I, point of order, sorry, it's I.
That's correct.
As attention to an error in procedure. Okay, adjourn.
Q.
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 All right,
We all know that one.
recess,
G.
Z.
G.
correct.
Yeah.
Previous question,
Oh, ends the debate. F.
F, correct. Table,
K. Maybe.
yes, yes. And we are definitely going to talk about table. Appeal,
I wasn't sure.
that is
Hey,
P, that
P,
takes
yeah, P.
from the chair and gives it to the assembly. Postpone indefinitely,
table,
D.
no, it's D. It kills
D.
the main motion.
motion.
Refer,
Okay, yeah.
C.
correct. Postpone,
E.
that's E. Limit or extend debate,
B.
correct. Reconsider,
M.
M.
M. And main motion.
L.
L.
Woohoo.
Okay. You all got a lot of them, but a lot of times we think we know and we utilize motions in not the appropriate way, not the way they were meant to be done. Okay, so we'll talk about some of these as we go through this afternoon, okay? I'm also going to try to keep in mind some of those things that you mentioned that are distressing to you as far as meetings are concerned. So we can, and I'll make sure that you all get this parliamentary motions matchup for later, okay? All right, so does everybody have my screen now?
No, we just see you.
Okay, let's see what I can do. Hold on. Trying to bring it back. Doesn't seem to be working. Wait 1 second. I guess I have to start over with sharing the screen. You don't see it now?
Mm-mm.
No?
Nope.
No.
Wonder
There
why.
it is.
There it is.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. So here we are. One thing I would say to you is no matter what your experience, whether you've spent years in education or in business or in community, church, or other affiliation, it typically takes about 2 years for a person to really get a handle on what's necessary to become an effective school board member. So the easy part is getting elected. And after that, the real work begins. Excuse me 1 minute. I'm sorry. My granddaughter is caregiver for my mother tonight, and she had to ask a question, so I do apologize. But after you've been elected, the real work begins, and becoming an effective school board member is a metamorphosis. So hopefully nobody's looking for an overnight transformation. And I know there are some of you who have been on the school board a long time. Would you agree with me that it took about 2 years before you really knew what was going on?
I'm a slow learner. It took me a lot longer. I would say 4. It was amazing. You think you get your arms around something, and then your board changes real quickly. Your superintendent changes. There were so many adjustments.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Well, so what I'm saying is it takes at least 2 years, so don't feel badly. Okay, you see the cartoon on the slide. Anybody recognize that cartoon? It comes from a children's fable.
First, I thought it was the emperor in his no clothes.
The
Or
Emperor's
his new clothes.
Emperor's New Clothes. Is everybody familiar with that story? Okay.
Yes.
There's nobody who's not familiar. Is that correct? Okay. You might want to know, what does this have to do with the school board? And what I'm saying to you is that as elected officials, you may be held in high esteem by some citizens. And as they look to you, your head may swell ever so slightly with the attention and the perceived status. But we have to take care not to become fooled into thinking that by virtue of your membership on the board, that you have power. So be careful that you don't become the emperor with the new clothes by people suggesting to you that you have power that you do not have. The school board meeting can be the arena wherein that big head syndrome may be demonstrated. The board meeting is the forum for the school board. Now, as we talk about the meeting of the school board, remember that it is a meeting of the board in public as opposed to being a public meeting. And there is a distinction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. During the school board meeting, you project an image that speaks about you as individuals, you as a school board, and Clark County as a school district. What you see may not be what the community is getting. Consider the question, what message does our school board meeting send? Consider it from the perspective of residents who may not necessarily be aligned with you. So be mindful of the fact that even though the boardroom may not be crowded, and sometimes it just isn't, that Clark County citizens are aware of the goings on of the Board of Education. So during the meeting, ask yourself, what does your facial expression say? What about the tone of your voice? Are you speaking loudly enough to be heard and understood? Are your questions designed to seek clarification or to call somebody out about a topic with which you have consternation? Are you asking questions that were clearly answered in the board packet? And if so, is it your intention to be sure that specific facts get out for the public? And that's okay. Or is your question being presented because you haven't reviewed the board packet as thoroughly as you should have? Are you argumentative with your comments or are you supportive? Are you dominating the meeting or are you a wallflower? So we're going to review some components of the monthly school board meeting because all of these things are important, and I hope it will make sense to you. So when we talk about parliamentary procedure is a tool. It's a powerful tool. And when it's used appropriately, it can help the board conduct effective meetings. So we're going to talk briefly tonight about making motions and voting during the short time we have together. Parliamentary procedure, again, is a tool. It's not a weapon. And sometimes we use it as a weapon, wielding it against other members of the governance team. Parliamentary procedure works best when all members of the board have some familiarity with it, rather than depending upon the board president or any one member to be the individual with understanding about parliamentary rules. There are some school boards that have a parliamentarian, a paid individual. And let me say now that others use their board attorney. But all board attorneys are not equipped to be the parliamentarian. Jim Slaughter, who Dr. Yeager, you found that the parliamentary matchup is his. Jim Slaughter is an attorney, but he is also a trained parliamentarian. The other thing I would say to you that the purpose of the matchup is to help people recognize that no matter how much they know, they don't know it all. I'm constantly being trained in parliamentary procedure because there's always something else to learn. There are a lot of authorities that are available. The board determines which one they will use. Most school boards in the United States use Robert's Rules of Order. And I believe your board does that as well. Yes, okay. So again, parliamentary procedure is a reference tool. It's a guide, and it should be used only after looking into state law or local policies. Both of those prevail over Robert's Rules of Order. I don't care what Roberts says. If your board policy says something different, and or if state law says something different, then throw Roberts under the bus. Okay? You should never debate those instances wherein Roberts and Georgia law or Roberts and local school policy are in conflict. Always go with the law or board policy. Okay? Does everybody get that? You can't get hung up on Robert's Rules of Order if it is in conflict with something that our policy says. Okay? Good? All right. I'm showing you a picture of Robert's Rules of Order. It's the most widely used parliamentary authority. It's Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, as you can see on the screen. It is revised every 10 years, and the copy on the slide is current. It's the 11th edition. It was revised in September 2011. And while you might not think it's important to have the most recent copy, because I encounter people who have a copy that has a blue cover or a green cover or a gray cover or a red cover, those are old. And what you need to know is that with this copy, the 11th edition, it contains some 120 changes from the previous edition. One thing I can tell you right up front is that it describes electronic meetings, and that was not in any of the previous copies. The 12th edition is going to be published this summer, and it will be available to members of the National Association of Parliamentarians during its national training conference at the end of August. The newer edition will have an ivory colored cover, and it will be available in paperback and in hardback, and it will say 12th edition. That's important for you to know, especially if you're going to have a copy available for your board office. Every member of the school board really does not need a copy of Roberts. And if you start showing up at your board meetings with a copy in tow, then you probably really have a problem. Okay? Robert's Rules of Order is written in tiny font. It's much like the King James Version of the Bible. It's difficult to read and a challenge to interpret. So we want to be careful about that. Okay? What I'm showing you now is Robert's Rules of Order in brief. If you're interested in having your own copy of our, and I call it RONR, Robert's Rules of Order. Yes, I see. Dr. Yeager is showing the copy of Robert's Rules in brief. It's much easier to read. And the fact of the matter is it's written in everyday language, and it has most of what you would need for participating in meetings. I would encourage every board member to take advantage of parliamentary training beyond what we'll cover this evening, because there's so much to learn. You won't get it all in one workshop, but understanding parliamentary procedure and using it as a tool will help make you a better governance team member. Robert's Rules in brief deals specifically with meetings. The other copy that I showed you deals with bylaws and starting an organization and all those kinds of things. This in brief deals with meetings, and it ties back to the larger volume. It too is going to be available probably in September. It'll be available for purchase online or at most bookstores for about $15. Price ranges. The cover of the shorter version will be yellow, just like the one pictured in the PowerPoint, but it will.
Excuse me, Ms. Bowie. I think there's some static coming from your side that I'm hearing in my ear, but I just want to check to see if others.
Oh dear.
I don't know if something is touching your mic at different times.
Maybe so. Let me. Are you hearing it right now?
No, I don't hear it at all. Maybe I'm the only person hearing it.
My papers. I'm sorry. I had my papers up.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. That's important. I apologize to you all.
Do we ask a question now,
Yes.
or would it be better to wait?
Go right ahead.
If we are using Robert's Rules of Order, do they have to be referenced in policy? I'm trying to figure out in terms of we have policies that say,
baby girl.
say certain things about how a meeting, how our
You
meeting.
do a backwards look? For real? Girl, you better do it then.
Dr. Maddox, I think you're
Oh, sorry.
that's okay.
So
Apologize.
I'll try to answer Greg. We have a place in our policy that says that we use Robert's rules, and I think that means that you don't have to reference it in policies, because it's either our policies supersede Robert's rules, or if we didn't say anything, then it's Robert's rules. Is that correct?
Yeah, but when you have it mentioned one time in your policies, and what that means is if your policies don't cover a matter, then you would refer to Robert's Rules, yes. And the reason that you mention it at all is because there are so many parliamentary authorities, okay? But what you want to be careful of when you look at your policy, and I didn't look for this, I did look at your policies briefly, but you know, looking at policies is difficult with school boards. You've got so many, but it should say Robert's Rules of Order newly revised. And that'll mean it's always the current edition. Does that help? Okay, so with this, if you get the new one, it will indicate that it's the third edition. Robert's Rules of Order in Brief. This is the second edition of Robert's Rules of Order in Brief. It'll indicate that it's the third edition, and it will refer to the 12th edition of Full Roberts. Does that make sense, or did I make it more confusing?
No, Senator, I was trying to say something, but I was muted. Patricia, what's being discussed now and what John said is true. Robert's Rules of Order is in policy BA, but I don't recall reading anything saying like what Zenda said a few minutes ago, the newly revised edition.
And that's easy to change. That is just an edit so that it says Robert's
Yes.
Order newly revised. And that is the official name of the document, okay?
Okay.
So at some point when you all are going through policies, you simply put comma newly revised. And that way you don't have to change it every time Roberts is revised, all right?
And that doesn't need to be approved. It just gets edited. It's just an edit. It's not an
With the
approval.
board attorney to be sure. And that's one thing I want to point out. I am not legally trained. I am not an attorney, but I think that is simply an edit. It is putting the official name of the authority. Okay? Okay. So I want you to be sure to at least be aware of that for your own purposes. And this is something that you can use with other organizations with which you are involved. The thing to know is that for school boards, there are some peculiarities that are very, very different from Roberts. We'll cover some of them tonight, but we will not cover all of them. So always be careful because Georgia law says some things that defy Roberts, okay? Okay, so when we talk about dealing with the school board and the school board meetings, I would just recommend that it can be very, very helpful to use a tip sheet. And you have a tip sheet in the documents that were sent to you. I understand, Mr. Worthy, that you don't have everything, but there's
No.
a tip sheet. And at the end of this, Mr. Worthy, if you'll get back in touch with me, I can make sure that you have all the documents. If there's anybody else who needs it, do you all have my email? My email address is on the last slide. So just
Yes.
contact me and remind me. Please don't depend on me to remember what I said I was going to do, as I have great intentions, but I may forget. But these are just some things on this slide to keep in mind, because this workshop is not a magic pill, but a tip sheet, the one like you is found in your material for today. I hope that will be something that you'll find useful as you navigate various meetings in the months to come, because after years of study and practice, I still find it useful. There's so many little nuances, okay? And Jim Slaughter has a great website, lots of material that can be helpful for you as a school board member, because he works with the National School Boards Association. So he does understand school boards. So that can be helpful to you as well. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the school board meeting. As I said earlier, the board meeting is a meeting of the school board in public, and a member of the Board of Education has to always consider decorum, but especially during meetings of the board. Your school board meeting is the forum during which the board conducts its business, and many people fail to realize that the school board meeting, while open to the public, is not the public's meeting. The school board is required to allow citizens access to most of the discussion, but those in attendance have to demonstrate respect for the board's business by adhering to your rules of decorum as set forth by the Board of Education. And you do have some rules of decorum. Many boards offer a public comment segment, and I see that you all do. And I see that you have the rules about that in your policies. So during the time that's set aside, citizens may address the board, but they should not expect immediate response from the board. Now, the board president is encouraged to advise the audience of when and how speakers can expect to receive a response to their questions or comments. I saw in one board meeting that there was a script that the board president presented about. You've come before the board and you have 3 minutes and what you can't say, that kind of thing. It really needs to be explicit. And I didn't hear this, but I may have just missed it. Really need to let the public know that there will not be a response from the board. And the reason I say that is because the board always needs to expect that there may be one person sitting in your audience who has never attended a school board meeting anywhere. And if you keep that in mind, it helps you to be a little more friendly to your public. So let them know there's not going to be a response, because when people have addressed the board and they walk away and you go on into your meeting, what they think is that is very rude. And you're not being rude. It's just that that's not the purpose of the meeting. Does that make sense? Okay. So I would encourage you to look back at the script and make sure that it does include something like that. Typically, the response that people will get comes from the administration, the superintendent or a designated representative of the administration. And it does help to say that people will hear within a certain number of days. Regardless.
I wanted to clarify that because we have had a discussion on that very fact, and this was a number of years ago.
Okay.
And it never quite made it into the script. Now that you kind of jog my memory on it, but because we did feel kind of embarrassed about people responding to us, or talking with us and not us responding. And because sometimes it's very heartfelt, but we also wanted clarification as to who would respond to that person and under what, and what would be the length of time and that type of thing. So thank you for mentioning that again.
Yeah, the response comes from administration. Rarely are the comments made by the public really the purview of the school board. They are typically talking about things that are very meaningful to them, very personal, but the school board doesn't deal with that. It typically has to do with operations. So you let them know that member, you don't have to designate exactly who, but the administration will respond with our speakers within the next 10 business days or something to that effect. You don't want to make it too tight. Don't say you'll hear from them in 24 hours because that may not be possible. But you want them to know there will be some kind of response. And that response might be, thank you for coming to the meeting. I don't know. But if they're asking questions and they deserve some kind of information, it should come from administration. The other thing to keep in mind is that we say that because if a board member feels as passionately about that topic as the presenter, he or she may give information that is not appropriate to give in that audience, and it may not be accurate. So you don't want to shoot from the hip. Okay?
Can I ask a question here? So frequently it seems that when not board members, when members of the public do ask to speak, it is due to an upcoming vote or an issue that the board is about to take action on.
Okay.
And so it's not that they're necessarily looking for a response from administration, but instead want to ensure that the board is cognizant of the feelings of the community around a particular issue. In those circumstances, like, are we able to kind of discern when it is they're looking for information and when it is that they're wanting to get their opinion out due to an upcoming vote, in regards then to how we respond back? Does that make sense, Ms. Boone?
Yes, and my suggestion would be to insert in that last sentence that the president provides as appropriate.
Okay,
The administration will respond to our speakers as appropriate, or something like that. That gives you a little leeway.
all right, thank you.
But you all designed, you designed that response.
I think we have this in a policy. I know that, like Greg said, we talked about this several years ago, and I recently ran across it. Maybe I was reading board minutes or something, but I thought we did commit this to a policy on response, and it's very similar to what we just talked about.
Okay.
You're correct. You're correct, Linda. It's in policy. And also normally the president would read that strip when speakers, just before speakers would speak. And I do recall it said, have any questions that you can put in writing to the superintendent or the president. But the statement that Zinda just added, that would be appropriate what Dr. Thomas just asked. That would be appropriate to add to that script.
Okay, well, you all will work it out.
Yes.
The other thing to keep in mind is that regardless of who is speaking, whether it's a citizen addressing the board, a staff member making a presentation, or a fellow governance team member offering a comment, it is imperative that every board member listen attentively to the business at hand, with equal attention given to every visitor, every speaker. And I do know that for school boards, there are sometimes, for most districts, there is somebody who comes to just about every meeting and has something to say, and it's usually on the same topic. Now, this happens in a lot of districts. It is very hard as that person approaches the podium for you to keep your face straight and your body language as it was for the previous speaker, because what some people want to do is, okay, you can't do that. So you just want to have that decorum there, and just remember, if the person has been given the opportunity to address the board, you want to give them attention. Again, body language, facial expression, tone of voice can be an unnecessary giveaway as to personal feelings. If a board member is to participate in taking action on agenda items based upon full information, he or she must be willing to hear all opinions. And I hope that makes sense.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
And other people can probably speak better to this than I, because I think I missed a meeting where this happened.
Okay.
I don't miss many, but what is a board to do with situations in which people run over their time and or are abusive or attacking verbally with regard to specific board members? Is that something that a board should handle through policy? And if so, what are our options on the kind of policy that could be used to deal with such situations? Thank you.
It can be policy, or it can be done through board norms. What you can say is that there will be no personal attacks. Now, I will tell you that as far as board members are concerned, because you are elected officials, you are far more likely to be attacked than anybody else. However, because you request that people give information about what they want to speak about ahead of time, you can try to discern that. You can include in your policy or your board norms what will be accepted and what will be not, what will not. You can say no particular reference to a specific student, especially by name, teachers by name, that kind of thing. The board has to decide what it will accept. But the other thing is, you said 3 minutes. So at the end of 3 minutes, and I think you all have the number up on the screen, I saw that. When that time is up, this is where the board president goes into action. Ms. Bowie, thank you. You have reached your 3-minute limit. We appreciate what you've said. If you have your comments in writing, you can leave them over here with Ms. Anderson or whomever, and the board will receive that. We thank you, and we're calling on our next speaker, and you have to be firm in that. That's the best that I can do, and calling the next speaker to come up. But 3 minutes has to be 3 minutes. And so if I come and I'm a friend of the board and everybody loves me, you can't let me talk for 5 minutes unless I am on the agenda to make a presentation from GSBA. That's different. But if I'm there to do public comment, you have to hold my feet to the fire just like everybody else. Go right ahead. What'd you say? Are you muted?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
A follow-up on that is if there were the situation, I'm not claiming that necessarily there is, but if you had a situation where there were chronic abuses, so let's say someone comes and runs over their time and doesn't even walk away from the microphone, and then they do that the next month, and then they do it the next month and the next month. Do other districts have any policies in place to deal with more chronic problems? Not a one-off, but and not a situation where you're tired of hearing the person, but they play by the rules. It's where it's a chronic situation where they don't play by the rules, and it means that every single meeting, you know that you're going to have to, crack the whip. Is there anything beyond that in district policies in other districts? Thank you.
Yes, and that can be included in the policy, that if you do not comply with the requirements of addressing the board, then you will no longer be permitted to address the board. You have to remember, this is a meeting of the board in public. You set the rules. A person can be escorted from the board room by a school resource officer if that is necessary, and that has happened in some districts. The person is using profanity, yelling and screaming will not stop. If you have some form of law enforcement in your room, they can be escorted out. But you can include in the policy, some boards have it where a person can only address the boards, kind of like winning prizes on the radio. You can only win once in 6 months. You can only address the board on the same topic, once every 3 months or something like that. Whatever you want to do, you can do, because remember, you must allow access. Some boards don't have public participation. I'm not suggesting that you quit that, but you can be as stringent as you'd like.
I think that's going to be a law that you have
Thank
to
you.
do that. I was reading that in the reviews of one of the reports from GSBA that passed. And so everybody's going to have to do public comment or give the public access to make comments. So we won't have any of that. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Okay, but you make the rules. Okay, and just hope that the legislature doesn't ever take over that, but you make the rules, okay? And that goes through the amount of time you give, etc. Okay. The other thing is, when it comes to the school board meeting, that board package should be distributed prior to the meeting, either electronically or in paper copy. I think that most boards are doing it electronically now. Every board member is expected to review the material and come to the meeting prepared to participate in the discussion. Now, I know that some of us are very detailed and we highlight and outline and we have Post-it notes, and others just want to read the executive summary. I'm not suggesting that either of those is a bad thing. You're different, so you do it differently. But the board member who comes to the meeting having declared his or her position on agenda topics may not be living up to his or her responsibility. I say that because it is during the meeting where other points of view are expressed and should be seriously considered. An effective board member makes a decision after the discussion. So it is important not to ahead of time say how you're going to vote. because that means you've already decided and you're not going to listen. Another point about preparation is that board members are encouraged to present questions to the superintendent prior to the meeting, so staff members can be prepared to respond appropriately for the benefit of the entire board. You all may do it a little differently. The superintendent may tell you to whom to send certain questions, or it may be through the superintendent. That's something that can be covered in board norms. But what's important is that, as to the extent possible, that you provide your questions in advance. And if you've ever been a presenter, you know that whatever it is you're doing, inevitably, somebody's going to ask you the one question that you couldn't answer, and it doesn't feel good. So it just makes for a smoother meeting. And you all have a work session, do you not?
Yes.
Okay, so the work session allows that as well. If there's still a lingering question, make sure that the staff is aware of it so that they can address it. Okay. I think the other thing is that members of the governance team should understand and respect the role of the board chair. The board chair is the facilitator. Unless your board is very informal and informality is not encouraged, speakers should be recognized by the chair before they take the floor. Interjecting comments without being recognized by the president is rude, and it suggests that what I have to say is more important than any other member's comments. The other thing I've seen a lot is a member raises his or her hand to seek the presiding officer's attention, and that's fine, but it is in incredibly poor taste to continue to hold up one's hand while a member is speaking. Have you all ever seen that? Somebody else is speaking and I want to make a comment. I hold up my hand, and the whole time the person is speaking, I've got my hand up. It doesn't come across very well. It does not look good for the board. So keep that in mind. And please note, I am not suggesting that I saw all these things in your meetings. These are just things that I have noted over the years, and those are the things that we deal with in parliamentary procedure. If your board, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, has there been any discussion about how to do this in the way that we're doing meeting right now? I mean, because this is a whole nother world, and sometimes, you know, I feel rude interrupting someone, but I don't know when they're done speaking, and you know, and I don't know if I raise my hand if the chair can even see me, so, or the president. So I don't, are there any rules that people are thinking about in terms of this forum?
Yeah.
There are some rules. As a matter of fact, the National Association of Parliamentarians has a whole thing about how to run electronic meetings. I don't do really well with it, but I know that there is in the, with the Zoom, there is a raise your hand feature. And as long as the facilitator or one of the hosts will take care of that, noting when somebody has raised their hand. Do you all see that on your screen? Somewhere at the bottom or the top, a feature where you can raise your hand? Okay.
We use that, but I think the challenge for us is I don't know that we have anybody that's just really paying attention to that. I know Tish does a real good job of seeing everything that happens during the meetings, and so she usually will say something. But I don't think it's anybody's in particular's job to do that, and maybe that might be something that we should consider.
Yep, you get somebody, and it should be a staff member, because that way they can focus on that, making sure that the president is aware that somebody is ready to ask a question.
Great, thanks.
There's a raise hand, and if you open up the participant list, there's a raise hand option. So if I click it right now, I don't know who sees that, or Lakeisha, do you see it?
I can see it.
Oh, Lisa sees it because she's the host, right?
Okay, I don't see it.
I don't know, but maybe we can figure out a way to make that work.
Okay, and I think the information about that is in one of the Zoom trainings. and you can go to the website and it'll show you. But that can help. Other than that, you know, always to be able to say, excuse me, and then you just do the best you can. Okay. This is a different world for us. Okay.
Zenda,
Yes.
before you leave, the president,
Yes.
the chair, yes, members should always respect the chair. And I know things have changed, but we talked about point of order a few minutes ago when errors are being made in parliamentary procedures or Robert Rules of Order. Is it still that you don't have to get the permission from the chair to speak? You go ahead and call point of order?
There are certain motions that do not require that one is recognized, but even with those motions, you do not want to interrupt a speaker if you can help it. But yes, point of order is one of those where you can raise that point of order.
Point of order is one of those which is, if I recall correctly, if it hadn't changed, because you know, you talked about the new revised edition of the Robert's Rules of Order. If I recall, point of order is an incidental motion.
Point of order is an incidental motion. And what we want to be careful about is not getting too hung up in the different, you know, there are privileged motions, incidental, etc.
Yeah.
Roberts is intended to help make the meeting go more smoothly. So therefore, you use those motions sparingly, but when it's necessary. If there has been a mistake, for example, we did not get a second, and because the law, Georgia law requires that you name the seconder of the motion, it's important that that person be named. Okay. I will tell you though, since you brought that up, Roberts now says that it's not necessary to note the name of the seconder. As a matter of fact, what Roberts says is if a motion has been made and the body has gone on to start discussing it, don't go back later and say, well, we didn't get a second. It's moot. Second means we want to talk about it. And so if you've been talking about it, it no longer requires a second. That is for other organizations. That won't work for the school board, okay? Because the law requires that you name the person who made the motion and the person who seconded the motion. All right? Am I making sense?
Sure. In other words, what you're saying,
okay, that's one of those places.
If the motion didn't get a second, it dies.
In the other world, yes.
Okay.
What you all have to make sure of is the chair would say, the president would say, I'll entertain a motion. A person makes the motion. The presiding officer calls for a second. If there is no second, the presiding officer says the motion failed or the motion died for lack of a second. But that is a little different than what I was talking about before, where you're in Kiwanis Club and they want to talk about whether or not they're going to have a gala. Somebody moves that it be held on June 6th and they go ahead and start talking about the date. Well, later on, you don't come back and say there was no second. Y'all talked about it. Okay? Okay.
Gotcha.
Yep. So just to follow back up, what I'm hearing you say is that even if there are these motions, what were they called, privileged or whatever?
Yeah, privileged motions, incidental motions.
Incidental, yeah.
Main motions.
Right, but even though you can do those without being recognized by the board president, it's bad form, is it, to interrupt? Is that what you kind of implying? It that doesn't look good?
It doesn't look good. You want to be as courteous as possible. Okay, so you try not to do that. You try not to interrupt someone who is speaking. You wait for a pause and you jump in. Any of us who've ever jumped double Dutch rope, what you do is you wait for the ropes to get to just the right place and then you jump in. So you want to try very hard not to just be rude. Okay? Okay. So in talking about the officers, I did give you a copy of a sample job description. It says a sample job description of, I think it may say board chair, because throughout most of these school boards, they refer to their presiding officer as chair. So forgive me for that.
Yeah.
But at the very bottom, there is one paragraph that says vice chair or vice president. And the thing that it is important is that it allows, the job description allows all members to be clear as to the role of the board president as well as the vice president. To that end, since you elect your board officers, the team should always take into consideration the characteristics necessary for effective leadership. And I'm going to say this, and I don't know enough of you for you to take it personally, but everybody on the board does not need to be board president. There is a skill set that is required to be an effective board president. And I served on a board where they felt like everybody could be chair. Well, no, that's not a good idea. So you want to choose your officers carefully, and remember, the vice president is not just a placeholder. The vice president assumes the role of the president in your case, in her absence. So the same skill set is required for both. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay. And what I gave you is a sample job description. If you all don't already have one, you can develop one, and that might give you some ideas, but you need to know what it is you're looking for. Okay? So choose wisely. A couple of other general matters for consideration is when you're talking about the school board meeting, please refrain from the use of acronyms. At least be sure to spell them out by saying, for example, the Georgia School Boards Association, or GSBA, the Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax, or SPLOST. Keeping in mind that, again, some individual in your audience may be attending a school board meeting for the very first time. When I was a new school board member, I was appointed. It was a 7-member board, but everybody else was a veteran. I was appointed at the time of budget hearings. They started throwing around all these acronyms. I didn't have a clue as to what was going on, and I felt like, what in the world am I doing here? And what we understand is that when people get stuck on that acronym that they don't understand, they're not hearing anything else. So please be careful. If you have a staff person presenting and they say something like NSBA or GSBA or DOE, Mr. Franklin, would you tell us what DOE stands for? And please don't say for the benefit of the audience, because then you make them feel even more stupid. Okay?
Senator,
Sir?
I want to interject something here.
Okay.
When I was president, I put together an orientation manual for new board members and also veteran board members. And I'm looking at about 3 or 4 pages here, and I do recall getting these pages from you. Educational acronyms. They're all listed here. And I know exactly what you're saying, because when you use acronyms, and I try, every time I use an acronym, I try to spell it out, FTE, full-time equivalent, because even that, as you stated, that may be some board members not familiar with this. But anyway, in this manual here, all of the educational acronyms are in here. Now, there may be some new ones, but you covered the waterfront. In fact, about 1/4 of what I have in this manual, I got it from you.
Well, it's helpful to have that in writing, but that doesn't help you at a meeting. Okay?
No, but it's helpful for board members to know what those acronyms stand for.
Yes, and veteran board members get to a place where some of those acronyms are meaningless. But just remember that, and also remember to use your microphone. As I used your YouTube presentations of the meetings, there were a couple of you that were very, very soft spoken, and for me, I couldn't hear what was being said. remember that it is a business meeting. You want that information to be out. So speak into your microphone, try to speak as clearly as possible. And just remember that this is not, it's not pillow talk. Okay,
I've got a question.
please.
And this is in light of the Cognia report.
Okay,
And I don't know which two meetings you were able to observe, but we've had meetings that and again, I'm getting back to the decorum of the meeting,
all right.
which is to me implies an agreement between the board officers, and the public. And we've had meetings where, when I look back on them, I am embarrassed because we did not have the decorum that we needed. And on the one hand, we deal with things that people can be very passionate about. But on the other hand, if the audience treats like the meeting as a pep rally, then we end up where one side is rooting and the other side roots. And in the meantime, we're trying to maintain a decorum. And I don't know if other school boards have this situation. I guess it depends on what's on the front burner. So I imagine that they do come up, but I'm not sure if our training tonight is going to be useful. We really need guidance, I think, in terms of how do we maintain the decorum so that Robert's Rules of Order can be fairly applied and utilized for an efficient meeting that the public can understand, and if they don't agree with it, at least know what happened.
Okay. You have the right to request, to demand that there not be applause and standing up and comments made by individuals during a meeting. It is incumbent, and I hate to do this, but it is incumbent upon the board president to make that clear and to be firm about it. In typical school board meetings, you don't have that, but if there is something on the agenda, it can be typically as something like cheerleaders. It really is. The selection of cheerleaders, and people come and they've got signs, etc. The board president has to take the opportunity to say, ladies and gentlemen, the Clark County Board of Education is pleased to have you attend this meeting. We want you to hear the business of the school board. However, we have to have silence in the audience, etc., and lay it out there. If we cannot get this, then we will clear the room. If you've ever watched, what is that, Judge Judy or any of those courtroom shows, the judge is in trouble.
Yes.
And it's at such time, a judge will even take the defendant and silence him or her. So yes, you have the right to do that, but you have to have the tools in place. So the board president has to indicate to the audience, this is not acceptable behavior. Kind of like you do at graduations, you tell people they can't have horns and whistles and all that, and they do it anyway. But in here, in that boardroom, you can call for a recess and clear the room if you have to. Sometimes even the suggestion that we will clear the room or, individuals will be removed can be helpful. Only thing I can suggest to you is that you have to try it. Does that help at all?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, because again, this is your meeting.
Yes, it
So
does. Yes, it does.
Okay. Okay. So again, I had difficulty hearing some of what was going on. So I just encourage you, use the microphone. The other thing I would say is the board should decide, are you going to use handles or not? And what I mean is, if the answer is yes, then every individual has to be addressed by Mr., Ms., Dr., Reverend, Miss, etc. Can't do that and then say, Lisa, would you do so-and-so? Okay? So just decide what you're going to do and then do that universally. All right. Briefly, I want to just share that this is just a few points about the board president. Typically, the superintendent and the board president collaborate on creating the meeting agenda. You all do have something in policy about your agenda, but you have to be sure that everybody is clear as to how it's done in your district. And new members, I don't know any of you, so don't get upset with me, but refrain from suggesting that you be allowed to change things right away. Spend some time on the board. Give things a chance to work before you insist on change. Understanding the processes and rationale behind them, things are very different on the board member side of the table. And you're probably beginning to see that already. But in facilitating the school board meeting, the president may call the meeting to order at the appointed time as long as there is a quorum present. And I heard your board president looking for that this evening. A quorum is a majority of the members of the board. The chair calls for a review of the agenda and then works to keep the meeting on track. If you don't have a quorum, the board president needs to announce that to the audience, even if there are only 2 people out there. We haven't started the meeting yet. It is the appointed time. It's 5:30. However, we're waiting for Ms. Bowie to get here. At that point, we'll have a quorum. She's called. She's on her way. Something to that effect. Just don't leave your folks sitting there. Okay? The other thing is that should there be any conflict during the business meeting, one thing your board president might do is to declare the comments out of order rather than calling an individual member out of order. That's a Roberts thing. And the reason you do that is that the president isn't there to make members angry, but to keep the business meeting. So it's the comments that are out of order. It means they're not relevant. That's not what we're discussing at this point. Also, allow the president to recognize you before you speak so that interruptions of speakers will be minimized. You may also find that if comments are addressed through the president, remarks tend to come across as less about personality and more about the matters at hand. Individual board members addressing each other can become very challenging. So it's a matter of just saying, Madam President, I'm not understanding what that question is about, or, she's not going to answer it, but she then turns to the speaker to ask for that clarification so that it doesn't get to be so antagonistic. Also, a recess may be called to allow for clearing the air or for dealing with emergencies, but should be a last resort so as not to draw additional unnecessary attention to an already difficult situation. Members of the board must try to understand the in-charge attitude of the president during such circumstances. If the board is not supportive, an already negative incident may accelerate to one that's out of order and embarrassing to all members of the team. And I heard somebody say that a little earlier, that looking back, it may be embarrassing. But the president may help clarify any motions on the floor. The president calls for debate and then for action. Any questions?
Is there like is there a president boot camp?
Yes. Yes, GSBA
Obviously.
for a board chair workshop, but also if you will remind me, I do have a document that is specifically for the board chair that offers some suggestions. And I'm sorry, I keep referring to board chair, but that's what most of the boards use. Okay. But the board chair workshop is available and anyone can attend. You don't have to be board chair. It does help board members. First of all, you get the training credits, but secondly, helps to understand how to work with your board president. Okay?
Yeah, yes. Zen, the one comment I noticed you have in your, on this slide here, facilitates, where the duties of the board president facilitates the meeting. But in our board policies, we have presides over the meeting.
It's the same thing. It's semantics, but I use facilitate because it sounds less overbearing. But certainly your board president is presiding, but facilitating the meeting, what I'm saying is helping it to move smoothly, helping to make things happen, helping to keep people on track. It's just a different word. I like it better.
Oh, okay, well, I just wanted to bring that out because I know we preside in the board policies.
Okay. All right. I'm going to do this part, and then I'm going to stop to allow us to take a short break. All right. So give me a minute. We're going to talk about the agenda. I know that your board does have some language about getting items on the agenda, but if you have a practice that is not like your policy, there needs to be a written procedure that explains how members of the board get items added to the agenda. It needs to be in writing. It can be helpful for new members, but it's a good reference point for responding to the public as well. They just expect that they tell you about something, wham, it goes on the agenda. You're not required to have the board president and the superintendent put together the agenda, but most boards work that way. Whatever the situation, every member of the board should have the same understanding of how the agenda is developed and how items are added. Contrary to popular belief, no member of the board has a right to have an item added. The agenda belongs to the board, and there should be consensus that any matter should come before the body. And here's where I have to say, no surprises. That has to be the mantra by which all members of the team abide. No surprises. So coming up with something to add to the agenda at the board table is a no-no. Now, the one person who may do that is the superintendent, but even so, he or she should have tried to connect with every member of the team to say, the Department of Education has sent us this. If we want this grant, it's got to be approved at this meeting tonight. Sorry, I didn't get it to you before, so that everybody is aware. No surprises. Okay. And the other thing is that as long as the law doesn't state otherwise, and at this time it does not, the board may revise the agenda, but it says that you should do so only as it becomes necessary. An effective board wants to avoid appearing to be less than transparent, and so will forego last-minute changes, especially if it's a major issue. So revising the agenda is allowed, but in my opinion, it should be avoided. Okay? Am I making sense? Doesn't mean that you can't do it, but you need to be careful in using it.
Yeah, I think that what's always been kind of a confusing thing for me,
Okay.
and I've been on the board for, I guess I'm on my 6th year or something like that.
Okay.
5th year, whatever. But anyway, is how things are put on the agenda. I mean, I've never been an officer, never wanted to be, but it's always been confusing to me, and I think we're trying to address it in policy so that it's really clear how something gets on the agenda. And I understand both sides of it. If every member, even if we do it 2 weeks ahead of time, if every member is able to add, say, well, I need this on the agenda, I need that on the agenda, then we're going to have meetings that last 9 hours instead of our usual 4 hours. So that doesn't make sense to me. On the other hand, sometimes things have been skirted in times past by not putting them on the agenda, things that you know, a number of board members feel like is an issue and should be discussed. And so I'm trying to, even in policy, how do you walk that line where, if board members were just reasonable people, then that wouldn't, you wouldn't even need policy. But board members come from different walks of life. They have different experiences. They have different points of view. And so how do you walk that line between allowing board members to bring forward things that matter greatly to them versus throwing everything into the agenda and having these 9-hour meetings?
Let me say this. I think that first of all, the thing you have to do is to get rid of the pronoun I. I want it on the agenda. The agenda is ours. And so the process that is developed doesn't necessarily, again, I would avoid putting a whole lot of things in policy because it's too hard to change. But your board norms offers a place to say how things get on the agenda. And that would be that your superintendent is the main player in putting the agenda together because he or she knows what needs to come before the board. As a board member, you have something that is really sticking in your craw, you'd like the board to address it, you all have to develop a process for that. It can be as simple as identifying it in writing, sending it to every board member, and determining that there is consensus that we talk about it. Now that has to be balanced against the superintendent saying, this is not a good time for us to talk about it until after the budget is developed, or we need to talk about this in such a month, things like that. So what you can do is to get some norms from other boards that do have procedures in place and see if you can't mesh that with some of the things you would like to do. And I can look and see what we have from other boards as part of their board operating procedures that may be helpful to you, but you got to remind me. Okay. But you do want to have some kind of process in place. It does need to be in writing, and it should avoid someone showing up at the board table with this new thing. Okay. So like I said, the board may revise the agenda. Now here's the place where Roberts differs from what can happen with the school board. Roberts says that an agenda may be amended during a meeting. The meeting may almost be over. And Roberts says you can amend that agenda, but such a revision requires a motion, a second, and a 2/3 vote to pass. That's not going to be appropriate for a school board since Georgia law suggests that action is determined by a majority vote. So even though Roberts says 2/3, it has to be majority for you. And again, because of the transparency issue, you don't want to do that when the meeting is almost over, if you can help it. Remember, the law prevails over Roberts. So we're not talking 2/3, we're talking majority. Your board policy indicates use of a consent agenda. And consent agenda or consent calendar is wonderful if it's used correctly. Are you all familiar with that? Do you?
Yes, we have one.
Okay, there was one meeting that I saw where there were like 2 or 3 sets of minutes to be approved. And they were approved individually. That should have been consent. And what happens is that during the work session, you identify we've got these 3 sets of minutes that need to be approved. Does anybody have a problem with any of them? nobody says anything, that means everybody's going to vote yes. That goes on consent. You do it in one motion. Okay. And you can do that and do it well. That can be routine committee reports, meeting minutes, any non-controversial items that don't require discussion or independent action. A consent agenda can save some time. It could be a few minutes or as much as half an hour, and allow the board to focus meeting time on items that require attention. But let me say this first. If even one board member expresses a need for additional debate on a consent agenda item, it must be removed and placed on the regular board agenda in the place where it would normally appear. Was that what you were going to address?
No, I wasn't. It was something else.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of alert the rest of the board on this. Those of us that are really familiar with the Cognia report, our board was dinged by Cognia for requiring a 2/3 vote instead of a majority vote. However, my reading of that report is that Cognia didn't really understand either, because they were quoting from our policies, but they were not quoting from board docs. They were quoting from some outdated material on the website. It didn't look to me like the Cognia report actually went to the source, the ultimate source of our board policies. So my interpretation, I can go back and look at it, is that everybody was wrong. That it sounds like we should always just have a majority. And is that for all votes? Every vote is a majority?
It's for everything except if you are doing the conflict of interest and getting ready to take a board member to task. In the code of ethics, the statewide model code of ethics indicates that that requires a 2/3 vote. That's the only thing I know of. If a 2/3 vote is required, the law will state so, because what the law says, and remember, I'm not an attorney, but I do know this, the law says that a majority vote determines the action of the board. So be very careful with that, because there are things that Robert says requires 2/3, not for you. And if there's something on the website that says 2/3, that's something that needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah, well, they dinged us on other things that were on the website that weren't actually our policy as well. So it's just kind of a big confused mess. Thank you.
Okay, is that on your website?
Yes, it was. I think we all probably assumed that Cognia would look at board docs to see what our policies are. We didn't know until after we got the report that it looked like they were looking at something that we didn't know hadn't been updated on our website.
Okay, well, now you know, and it's very important to get that cleaned up, because that needs to be consistent. It happens, but it's not a good thing. And that's where I went and got my information about the Cognia report. I got it from your website. I went under for the community, and I looked at that. So that's something you'd want to clean up. Here's the other thing. In receiving reports, the board doesn't take action to approve a report. Rather, there may be approval of a specific matter presented in the report. So check with your board attorney, because on one of those meetings, there was an approval of the financial reports. And I almost had heart failure. From a procedural point of view, procedural now, I'm not an attorney, a financial report, at the end of it, it is filed for audit, because the board can't really endorse everything that's included in that report. So approving it, in my opinion, is not a good idea. Check with your board attorney, but
Thank you. That one makes me absolutely crazy every time we do it. So thanks.
Because you're not considering every single line item in the financials. So all bodies refrain from approving or adopting reports, especially the financial report. Okay? Okay, any questions about that, about the agenda? All right. I'm going to suggest that we take, would 10 minutes be good for you? I have 7:15, so by 7:25, will you come back? If you don't come back, I can't sign your form.
We'll do it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we need to leave the meeting and then come back. Okay.
Well, I'm gonna leave mine up, but you can leave the
I'm
room.
muting everything.
Just
Okay.
mute and stop your video.
Okay, yes. Thank you.
Lisa? Lisa? Zenda?
Yes.
Oh, I was trying to get it muted, but it's not muted, okay?
Well, you see your microphone? Should
Hold on, I see.
be on the bottom or the top.
It's at the top. Hold on, wait a minute. Okay. I know what to do. I'm just gonna leave and then
Okay. You have made a big difference for me. Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, the cobwebs on this window are awful. Nothing we can do about it.
I'm back.
Hi, Mr. Worthy.
Yes, I'm an old time person. My dad taught me that.
I want to go on record as being here early.
Oh, you were ahead of me, Linda.
Yes, sir. For the
I'll
first time
remember you at
ever.
Christmas time.
Ever.
Okay.
The first one to arrive at the meeting and the first one back from the break.
How about
All right.
sometimes I get it just right.
Okay.
I'm also back, Miss Linda.
All
Okay.
right.
Great. I'm trying to figure out how I'll know when everybody's back.
We can look at our oh, that's right.
Dr. Knox is back. He just has his video off, he said.
Okay. He's probably eating.
I wish I had a fairy chef in my house. I was gonna say fairy godmother, but I just really need a chef. That would be great.
Well, 3 hours, this is a relatively short session.
Well, you know, we're at the home stretch and I have a lot of material, so I'm gonna try to push through, but I would rather it be that way than for people to be saying, is this ever gonna be over?
Oh, yes.
Okay, do you think we can go ahead?
We could just do a quick roll call if that would help.
If it's 7:25, rock and roll.
Yeah, well, that's 7:27 already.
Okay.
See who's back, Ms. Palmer.
Okay, we were talking about the agenda, and the one thing I do want to remind the body is the agenda is wonderful. It can be extremely helpful, but only if the body will adhere to it and utilize it. And one way to help with monitoring of time is for the copies of the agenda that board members have to have time allocations, so that you have an idea of how much time is anticipated to be spent on each item. You're not locked into that, but it does help to kind of guide the conversation, but that's not something that you want to put on the agendas that may be distributed to the public, because you don't want them holding your feet to the fire about it, but it can guide the work of the board. So that's something for you to think about and consider for the future if you don't use that right now. But again, the main thing is having that agenda is great. Amending it is okay, but you want to be very careful with that. Okay? So let's talk about, we're going to talk about motions. And the first thing I want to make sure that we understand is that only a member of the school board can make a motion. It is appropriate for the superintendent or a staff member to read a recommendation into the record. Subsequently, a board member will say, I so move. But that's the only time, and Roberts, I'm going to say Roberts would accept that terminology. Roberts doesn't accept it at all. No. However, if the information has been read into the record, then it's clear. The fact that a motion is made, you want to make sure that the wording is understood. Everybody's clear as to what it is we're going to be discussing. So you always want to be sure of that. A board member would then second the motion. I know that you all do have committees. And if a recommendation is coming forward from a school board committee, then it doesn't require a second. Does everybody understand that and understand why?
Say that again.
If you have a recommendation that comes, oh, never mind. I forgot. The law requires you to have a second. Okay. Robert says that if you have a recommendation that comes from a committee or comes from an other body, that it doesn't need a second because there's more than one person on the committee. However, I'm going to change that slide. You all draw a line through your copy wherever you have it, because the law requires your minutes to show the motion and the second.
Okay.
So it would still have to have it. Okay, so I apologize for that. It just hit me. By the way, the other thing that hit me today was your PowerPoint says June 2020. It's not June.
July.
Yes. I think I got stuck in last month. Okay. So if you were having a community committee, for example, then, and they were making a motion, you know, in another body, it wouldn't require a second because it was coming from a committee. For you, you always have to have a second. The other thing to note is if a person seconds the motion, what they're saying is, I want to discuss it. It does not mean that that person necessarily agrees with the motion, but they want to hear what it's about. And I say that because sometimes people feel that if you seconded the motion or if you made the motion, then you must vote in support of it. If the discussion takes place and you change your mind and say, no, this is not good, you can indeed vote against that motion. So a second does not obligate the member to vote in favor of the motion. Now, after that, the board chair may restate the motion. Roberts calls for the board president to restate it to make sure everybody knows what it is they're going to be voting on, but it may not be necessary for you. If it's a short motion, it's very clear as to what's going to be voted. The chair does not have to restate it. Restating the motion is to make sure the language is correct for the record. The chair then calls for debate, and as a courtesy, allows the maker of the motion to be the first person to speak to the motion. The president should call on members of the governance team in turn as she sees members raising their hands. And if she makes a mistake, that's all it is a mistake. And then the member would say, Madam Chair, I had my hand up before Ms. Bowie. Oh, I apologize. Go right ahead. That kind of thing. Sometimes in boards, the vice president can be helpful in assisting the board president with knowing what order people raise their hands.
Just a quick question. It seems like most of the time it's the superintendent is obviously not making a motion, but is certainly bringing something forward.
Right.
So how does that fit into that slide?
Well, the superintendent would bring forth the information and the member could simply say, I so move, if the information has been read into the record in detail. If it hasn't been read appropriately, then the member would say, I move that, blah, blah, blah. For example, the member can sometimes say, I move that we approve the recommendation of for the personnel report that was discussed in executive session. It was still a recommendation from the superintendent, but the board member makes the motion. The superintendent is not allowed to make the motion. It's just a technicality. He or she does bring forward the information. Okay. Please know that if you've not been board chair or board president, it's not as easy as it looks to facilitate the meeting, because you've got to listen to the discussion, monitor the sequence of raising hands, figure out what's going on with the audience, limit discussion, not allow someone to dominate, make sure that everyone's had a chance to speak. There's a lot going on. So it's just important to know that some help can be helpful. I also mentioned keeping one's hand raised is not a good idea. Once debate has concluded, the board president calls for the vote. And so before we move on to the vote, I do want to mention briefly the art of ending debate. And I think you all are familiar with calling the question.
Yes, I am.
Okay. We need to be sure to understand the correct way to end debate. A member might say, Madam Chair, I call the question or previous question, one of those. It simply means that the person doesn't have to be recognized. Okay, that's one of those motions where you don't have to be recognized, but you may not interrupt a member who already has the floor. So lots of times when that happens, we hear the president or the chair saying that the question has been called. So all in favor of the motion on the floor, please raise your hand. Have you heard that?
Mhm.
That's wrong.
I know.
It's not correct. Calling the question is a motion. And
Yes.
we have to be very careful that we don't allow one member, the one who's calling for the end of the debate, to have that much control over the body. The presiding officer must determine that the majority is indeed ready to end debate. So the presiding officer may say, is there any objection to the question being called? If there's no objection, then the chair moves forward with processing the vote on the motion that was on the floor. But if even one member objects, then the chair has to take a vote on the motion to close debate. All right? Now,
And you don't need a second for calling the question.
yes, you do need a second.
Okay. All
And
right.
that's why the chair is saying, is there any objection? That means people
Yes.
are agreeing, okay? The chair could also say, is there a second to calling the question, or is there a second to previous question? Then the chair has to process the vote.
Okay.
That's the vote for whether or not we're going to end debate. The thing that's very important is you don't get a chance to discuss whether or not we're going to end debate. If you're going to do that, you may as well keep talking about whatever the motion was.
And I've witnessed that to happen in various meetings, not in our board meeting, but I had a strong debate with the person. Said, you know, if you call it the questions to end the debate, and then of course, if passed, then you're going to still debate. Well, you defeated the purpose.
Yeah. So this is just, you know, this basically says we've spent 45 minutes talking about this. And there was one meeting that you all had where you spent about 45 minutes talking about something. But at that point, the board member is saying, we've talked about this enough. Let's vote. That's basically what they're saying. But you don't give that board member the authority to make that decision alone. Robert's Rules of Order requires a 2/3 majority vote for closing debate. But in accordance with Georgia law, remember what we said earlier?
Simple majority. Simple majority.
That's right. So your board needs a majority vote, and that's 5 in order to take that action. Any questions on that?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you mentioned that you stated that the calling the question, like that's the actual motion,
Yes.
that it's a second, but it's not up for debate. So at that point, as presiding officer, that means we would just go ahead and take a vote about closing the debate.
Correct.
Okay.
And so
and then go back and vote on whatever the original motion was.
yes, if the motion to end debate passes, if it passes, then you immediately vote on whatever the motion was that was on the floor. If the motion to end debate does not pass, you go back to your discussion.
Yep.
Okay.
Then you can talk.
So it is indeed a motion, even though the person might say previous question or I call the question. Is there any objection to calling the question? And again, even if one member says, I object, I want to discuss it more, then you must process the debate, the end of debate as a motion.
Okay.
Got it?
Got it.
I do.
Okay.
I have a question about that. So I get that part, but is that I maybe missed when you said it. Is that always necessary to do, or only when it's clear that the debate is like ongoing?
Yeah, and some people use it inappropriately, and I hadn't thought about that. Some people don't want to talk about it at all, so they call the question very early.
Mhm.
That's inappropriate, but it's still a motion. It's a legal motion. And that's why members of the body have to pay attention. A motion was just made. This person says, I called the question. What? Okay. So it should be used when you feel that we're saying the same things over and over and over again. Let's just vote. That's basically what it means.
But do you always have to do that before a vote or not?
No,
Okay.
no. It's only used when a member feels that it's necessary, feels
Okay.
been talking about something too long.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. The other thing is amending motions. And as we review the process for amending motions, I'm going to emphasize that Roberts really makes exceptions for small boards, and small boards are boards up to 12 members. Roberts makes a statement. This is in chapter 16 in Robert's Rules of Order. It's pages 487 to 488. I'm telling you that so you can look at it for yourself if you'd like. The rules governing meetings of small boards are that members are not required to stand while making motions or speaking, that informal discussion of a subject is permitted while no motion is pending. You may know of other school boards that have their discussion before they have the motion. Roberts is saying if it's a small board, that's okay. So they talk about whether or not we're going to have school uniforms in elementary school. And then after the discussion, a person will say, okay, I move that we have school uniforms in our elementary schools beginning next fiscal year. They know the motion's going to pass because they've already talked about it. And the reason that that is used is to avoid having to amend motions. Okay? So it is totally up to you. It's just that by the time you're getting ready to take action, there still has to be a motion, a second, and then the vote. And I just want you to know you can do it either way. But you as a board need to agree as to how you want to do it. So the steps that I just presented may not be necessary for every meeting of the school board, if that's what you decide to do. If it becomes necessary to amend a motion, y'all work with me here, okay? Be sure that the amendment is germane to the motion, that it does not change the intent of the proposed motion. Okay, it has to be relevant. As noted on the slide, an amendment alters the pending motion by striking out a word or a phrase or inserting a word or a phrase, but it should not change the nature of the motion. So I'm going to give you an example, okay? Member A moves that XYZ Board of Education approve implementing a recycling program in middle and high schools for fiscal year 2019. That's the motion. Member B seconds the motion. The chair asks member A if she wishes to speak to the motion. Remember what I said, it's a courtesy to allow the person who made the motion to address it first. Member A says this pilot project is, if successful, could be expanded to all schools after 1 year. So member C is recognized by the chair and says, I move we amend the motion by striking the words "and high." That motion was properly seconded. The chair says the matter before the board is to amend the main motion by striking the words "and high." The chair calls on member C, who made that motion, who notes that it may be practical to allow the pilot to be tested in middle schools first. then any glitches could be tweaked before expanding the program. So then member Q is recognized. And member Q says, Madam Chair, I move we amend the amendment by adding the words at a cost not to exceed $10,000 at the end of the motion statement. So we have a primary amendment and we have a secondary amendment. Everybody get that?
Sure.
All right. The secondary amendment is processed first. So let's say that after discussion, the chair calls for a vote on the secondary amendment. The secondary amendment is at a cost not to exceed $10,000. So there is a vote. The secondary amendment is approved. The motion now pending is the primary amendment. So the chair reminds the board that the motion under consideration is to approve XYZ Board of Education implementing a recycling program in middle, delete, and high schools for fiscal year 2019. So that's the primary amendment, to delete the words "and high." If the proposed amendment passes, then the chair indicates that the board will now vote on the motion as amended, which is to approve XYZ Board of Education implementing a recycling program in middle schools for fiscal year 2019 at a cost not to exceed $10,000. So you see, discussion of the matter prior to stating a motion can be expeditious, especially if you consider that the example I just presented is a simple motion. It has basic proposed amendments. But if a member has an additional suggestion, that can be considered, but it would have to be considered subsequently. After all that voting is taken, you could still deal with the motion and add something or delete something or change the $10,000 to $20,000, but it would be a separate act. Basically, what I'm saying is you can only have a primary and secondary amendment. All right. I saw something in the cognitive report that said something about sub and sub and sub and sub. I'm not sure what that was referencing, but what I want the board to understand is that you can only have a primary amendment and a secondary amendment. You can't have more than that at one time. And that is why, as I went through that example, that is why some boards have their discussion first and then call for the motion. Does that make sense? Please say yes.
It does. Thank you.
Yes, it does. This is an area of, I get easily confused in this area when I'm trying to figure out where things are coming from and keeping up with what has the slight changes. So I know that this is an area I need to read more about and maybe even do some practicing, because I get really lost with these and substitute motions. And anytime you have to back up, like go from what's most recent to what was originally out there.
Yes. And especially if the motion itself is complicated. But that is why Roberts allows small boards to have their discussion first. That way they can formulate their motion. Everybody's clear as to what it is they really want, and then you can move forward. So when you all have a retreat, you might want to talk about that. It's not something you have to do all the time, but it is appropriate. And please do not allow anybody in your audience to say, y'all didn't have a motion yet, because it's not their meeting. Remember, this is a business meeting of the board in public. All right. So amending motion can be a bear, but there is a way to do it appropriately. And just remember that you're deleting a word or phrase or adding a word or phrase, and it has to be germane to that motion. You could not have added into that. We're talking about a recycling program. You can't start talking about school buses and adding that to that motion. It's not germane. Okay.
So it would sound like that if we have a motion and there's going to be a lot of discussion. We shouldn't just rush to make an amendment before we fully flesh it out, because otherwise we throw an amendment out there, and then someone says, yeah, but we need to have a secondary, and then someone else wants to throw a third. And so we need to not rush to amend the original motion until we kind of gravitate towards something that most board members can support. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And that could come, you know, as you're getting ready to move into discussion, the board president might say, before we put a motion on the floor, let's have some discussion about this. Or a member of the board could say, Madam Chair, Madam President, before we have, you know, make a motion on this, can we discuss this item? Because you know it's going to be a little complicated. It's okay for that to happen. You can be that informal.
And I think that's the difference in what I heard you say and what I heard Greg say. You're saying that have the discussion prior to the motion being made.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because once you put the motion out there, then you're going to want to change it and revise it. Now, if the motion is out there, it is okay for you all. Remember, Robert's Rules of Order, parliamentary procedure is trying to facilitate what you're doing, not trying to complicate it. So even if there was a motion, somebody could say, before we move on that motion, can we discuss this? Yeah, you've already have a motion, but you can clean that up later.
Okay, maybe, and I think this, Linda's right. This is a very important point. I don't want to miss it. So if we have, let's say, for instance, we've got something that the superintendent is bringing forward, and don't we have to, before we can discuss it, I always thought that someone has to say, well, let's have a discussion before we do any, I thought.
That's what she said.
Oh, okay, then I'm missing it then. So we have the discussion. So if the president says we're going to discuss uniforms and I mean, the superintendent has a motion that all middle and elementary schools have uniforms.
But it would be a recommendation from the superintendent, right?
It'd be a recommendation. So we would not. So it wouldn't. So the board president would say, okay, we've heard from the superintendent, let's discuss it. Is what you're saying.
Say, I'm calling for a motion, and then maybe the board, somebody in the board says, well, before we take a motion on that, I'd like to discuss it.
Okay.
Yes, either way, because what you're doing is saying, let's not make this complicated. Let's talk about it and figure out, do we want to do it and how we want to do it. So it's okay for you to do that.
Okay.
Am I making sense?
Okay, and that's before there's any motion, not just an amendment to the motion, but any motion. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because you see what happened with the amendments I put forward. If you're hearing that, it's like, what are we talking about? So yes, you can do that. You can have the discussion. What's important is when you're ready to vote, then somebody has to say, then the board chair would say, I'll entertain a motion. And that's when you get your official motion out there, because then you've decided what it wants to look like. That can be done. Please understand me. It's not, I'm not saying it should always be done, but it can be done. Okay?
Sense that it's going to be complicated.
Okay. All right. So the thing that I want to put out there is that there are challenges with school board members, especially because citizens tend to have differing understandings of the role of school board members. It's essential for members of the team to be clear. You have to help the public to know that the governing board deals with policy and administration is responsible for operations. Most often, matters affecting students at the local school, as I said a little earlier, might be addressed at the school, or even if the issue arises above the school, typically it should be handled by administration, not by the board. So every member of the governance team should have the same understanding of the district's chain of command. and be clear as to how to direct members of the community to implement your chain of command to take care of their concerns. Your chain of command should be in writing someplace. And a good way for the board to be sure that you're all saying the same thing is to have your set of board protocols or board norms or board operating procedures. When you get that together, that's where you can put your chain of command. And that might have been mentioned in the cognitive review report. I don't know. I didn't go back to read it that carefully. But another challenge for the board is time management. And what I said about presenting questions in advance of the work session, that can be helpful for your time management. It's helpful for preparation. It can be clear to the body as to the board's readiness to take action on an agenda item, or perhaps the item may need to be removed for additional research before taking it to vote. So those are things that can help make your meetings move a little bit better, expedited. If the superintendent recognizes that there are too many board members who have concerns about an issue, he or she is likely to withdraw that item, but they won't know if you haven't presented your questions, your concerns ahead of time. Okay? All right. Okay, I'm presenting this scenario and I'm going to read it, something I don't usually do. But while debating a motion, a member of the school board, without being recognized, says, "I call the question." The board president immediately ends debate and calls for a vote on the main motion. That's what we discussed a little while ago. Is everybody clear about that question thing? Calling the question. And Madam President, I will send you something in writing about the calling of the question and the amendments if you think that might help.
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. The main thing to remember is, again, this is one of those places where Robert says 2/3 vote, Georgia law says majority vote. Any questions? All right. We're going to talk about taking the vote. So the president asks if the board members have additional questions. If it's clear there's no further debate, then he or she moves forward with the vote, saying all in favor of the motion, and you give some direction. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All in favor of the motion, say yes. All in favor of the motion, say aye, something. But typically what I hear from board chairs is all in favor. Stand up, yell, something, okay? So you do give specific direction. Then all opposed to the motion say no or nay or whatever. It is important to do that because sometimes the board president may think that everybody is voting yes and miss the fact that somebody had not raised their hand, okay? If it's clear that there is no opposition, then the board president may offer the outcome of the vote. And this is something that should be done every time by stating the motion has passed 7-2, or the motion passes unanimously, or the motion failed 4-5. That means that there were 4 yes votes and 5 no votes, okay? But the information that's given is the yes votes first, the no votes. The board president should not routinely call for abstentions. Should only ask for abstentions if it's obvious that somebody hasn't voted. And it might be, Ms. Bowie, are you abstaining? Oh, did you all vote? I was distracted, okay? It could be something like that, but you don't routinely call for abstentions. And I'm saying that specifically for a school board because school board members are elected. You are elected to express an opinion. How do you express that opinion? Yes, through your vote.
Yeah, okay.
So you should vote. But there are instances where the law says that you should not vote. and become aware of those. If there is a conflict of interest, there are times when there is a family member who is being voted on for a promotion or something of that nature. And even if the law does not require that you not vote, sometimes you want to abstain from that vote just so that there won't be a perception of something inappropriate. Okay? You might also abstain from the vote if it's about an executive session item and you missed executive session. But the thing is, remember I said no surprises? So you would want to make sure that board members knew that you were going to abstain. After that, there is an announcement of the vote. The president would say there will be a recycling program in middle schools in fiscal year 2019 at a cost of no more than $10,000, so that it's clear as to what the outcome is. That was something I saw missing in your meetings. I know that your record is going to reflect it, but for me, looking at YouTube, I could not tell. So the motion passes 5-4. And here's the other thing when it comes to accreditation. If the vote is constantly 3-4, 5-4, and it's the same 5 and the same 4, it raises a red flag. And that shouldn't happen every single time. So look at that and be sure. And I don't know, I couldn't tell who was voting and who wasn't. So it's just something to share generically, okay? So again, call for the yes votes, then call for the no votes, and then announce the outcome of the vote. The motion passes, the motion fails. Okay?
Zenda, what you just explained is it unethical to do that?
To do
just consistently the same 4, same 5, which the example you gave.
It raises a red flag. It raises a red flag, especially with an accrediting body. And I know that because they told us about that in Fulton County. It raises a red flag. So it's going to happen sometime. But if it happens with every single vote, no matter what the issue, it causes some concern. Okay. After the vote, board members having the opportunity to express their opinion and having voted really must accept the decision of the board. It's inappropriate for a member to sit in silence during the meeting and then to vote no or to abstain. It's not illegal, but it's inappropriate because you're not giving your fellow board members an opportunity to understand that you're not planning to support this and why. You might persuade somebody else to go along with you. A board member won't always be on the prevailing side and should accept victories as well as lost votes. It's all a part of being a member of the team. So if asked about a motion wherein a board member voted alone, the appropriate response would be, this would be after the meeting and somebody in the community is asking you, the appropriate response is, I wasn't in favor of that matter, but the board has decided, and you go on describing the plan of action. The board has decided that we will have a recycling program in middle school, and we'll see after that. I don't like recycling. I think it's a waste of time. However, this is what the board has decided, blah, blah, blah. And that's what the focus is on. Use of social media as a forum for complaining about board decisions or speaking disparagingly about the board collectively or members individually is a violation of the Code of Ethics. And you can look at that and make sure. Georgia School Boards Association produces the Code of Ethics, the ethics brochure. I believe you've all seen it. It is on the GSBA website, and it does address that. It is inappropriate and a violation to badmouth your colleagues on the board. This
I
has
have a question.
nothing to do with freedom of speech.
I have a question.
Okay.
So in the situation where you're on the losing side of a vote, it's inappropriate. Is it even a violation of the code of ethics to then campaign, not necessarily on social media, but just kind of launch a campaign to reverse a vote? And I'll ask a follow-up question already, which is, if you disagree with something that's voted on, how long should you give that before you propose a reversion? Basically, so we'll say something's approved, you didn't like it, and so how long should you wait before you bring it up and say, I want to overturn that, basically, with a motion?
Well, I think the thing is that what you want to do is it's not inappropriate for you to campaign about it within the board.
No, I didn't mean it within the board. I meant in the community.
In the community, it's inappropriate. They don't vote. You do. And so that's inappropriate. That is sabotaging the decision of the board.
Yeah.
If you feel differently, then tell your colleagues who will vote. Tell them what it is, campaign among them, lobby for what you feel. But to do it in the community is inappropriate, because basically what happens is it ends up being something like you're almost saying, well, they were stupid for making that decision. That's disparaging.
Right. And is that a violation of the code of ethics? That was how I read it, or maybe not the code of ethics, but rather the state code, one of the domains.
It is a violation of the code of ethics, and I was just looking for my copy. And your local code of ethics should have something about that in there, because
Yes.
it is modeled after the statewide code of ethics,
Yes, it is.
right?
And so that feels like a pretty open and shut situation. Once the vote is taken, you abide by and support the board's decision, but not necessarily forever, obviously. So at some point, you might want to bring this back up again. How long? It's almost like a grieving period. How long do you wait until it's appropriate?
It depends. I can't give you a canned answer for that. It depends on the situation. It depends on what it's about. But that's one of those motions that I will talk to you about, which is reconsider.
Mhm.
But it should not be a surprise to your colleagues on the board. They shouldn't get to a meeting and you're raising a motion to reconsider an action that already took place, and they're saying, what?
Right.
What's that about? So you would have had to have lobbied for it. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wish I could tell you what's a good time, but it would depend on what the incident is.
Right. What I've seen in some balanced governance materials, because our superintendent brought balanced governance to our district as a concept, was that 1 year was a good thing for like kind of programmatic things. So let's say you're approving some new educational program, and one board member didn't like that and they were on the losing end of the vote. It would seem to be improper to then the very next meeting, the very next month, try to kill it because, well, the board approved it, but you haven't had time to get it funded, roll it out.
That's a good example, and you're right for that particular thing. As a matter of fact, a good time might be after schools, the administration has come back to give some kind of evaluation of the program, tell you how it worked. So that might be appropriate for that one, but it might be a different time frame for something else.
Good.
Under Domain 5, board meetings, one thing it does say is express opinions before votes are cast, but after the board votes, abide by and support all majority decisions of the board.
Right.
So you've got some homework to do if you still feel strongly about it. And it is indeed appropriate for you to do that homework and come back to the board with something else, but not surprise them at a board meeting, and not do it on social media, and not go to a Kiwanis meeting or a Sunday school and talk about what the board did that you didn't like.
Right. And not knock on doors and campaign.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes.
And I did pull out the code of the statewide model code of ethics, and it's in there. Okay. So that's after the vote. Again, it has nothing to do with freedom of speech. It's just a matter of working as a member of the team and accepting that my way is not always going to prevail. Okay, executive session. Oh boy, we are running out of time. Let's simply agree that the board takes action to go into closed session for very specific reasons in keeping with Georgia law. Every board member needs to understand the topics to be discussed and must agree that those announced topics are the only items to be discussed during the closed meeting. Now, although the executive session excludes member of the public, it's still a business meeting. It's just private. So executive session may be a bit less formal than the public meeting, but governance team members may choose to address each other by first names in executive session, but mutual respect and common courtesy are tantamount to the success of the confidential discussion. The same protocols implemented in the public forum should be honored during the closed meeting. The board president still facilitates the meeting. Members should raise their hands or use some other mutually agreed upon mechanism to be recognized in turn. Executive session is not a free-for-all. This kind of meeting is recognized by law because it gives the board the opportunity to hear privileged information. So every member must have a chance to express their opinion, ask questions, make recommendations, etc. But governance team members must respect the rules of debate and the code of ethics during that session. Following executive session, the vote, which is taken in public, the vote becomes public information. The discussion, who said what, etc., remains confidential. Now, legal counsel would have to guide the school board in the specifics, but it's like Las Vegas. Whatever was done in executive session stays in executive session. So that policy update that, that you should have had among your material, that gives you an awful lot of information about executive session and about other things. It's policy update, August 2012. Do you all have that? I know that Mr. Worthy does not have it.
Yes, yes.
Yes, we have it.
Okay, I just want to highlight a few things in that update. You may be able to, I don't know if you can see mine, but I have mine highlighted in yellow because I use it so much. But it's about the Open Meetings and Open Records Act. First part is what is a meeting on the first page.
Right.
And it's read through that. But please remember for your own sakes that any committee of board members created by the board is subject to open meetings law as well. Their meetings have to be published. They have to be open. So if it's your committee, it's got to follow those guidelines and you should have minutes. The other thing is that anytime you are discussing board policy or any kind of business of the board, that's a meeting. I don't care if you're at a local diner or at the movie theater or what, it's still a meeting. You all may go to lunch together and it's not a meeting, even if all 9 of you go. It's not a meeting until and unless you discuss board business. So don't get to a football game and go into a huddle. Because even if you're talking about what to eat the next week, it's going to look like you're having a meeting, okay? Right. It also says on the same page, email communication is not a meeting, but anything you put in writing is subject to disclosure under open records. Folks, if you don't want it to appear on a billboard, don't write it down. Text messages, emails, Post-it notes, I don't care if it is your personal email account. It is subject to open records, okay? On the second page of that document, remember that you can have local meetings by teleconference, and that you can allow a board member to be with you by teleconference, and there's information about that. It talks about how you must notify the public of the meeting, including this one, and I know that you did post it. The information about executive session and lists what the topics are that can be discussed. Know that if you get into executive session and you said you were going to talk about personnel and then you want to talk about real estate, you have to go back out and vote to talk about real estate and then go back into executive session. Okay, I see you nodding your head.
No, that one scared me. I thought because if it was on the list of approved topics that we would not have to necessarily go back out.
You've got what you're
In-
going into executive session to discuss.
Wait, what we've done and what Linda's referring to is that we have I guess you could call a catch-all statement.
That's fine, as long as it's stated. What I'm saying is you can't say I move we go into executive session to discuss matters of personnel. And then you get in there and talk about a student tribunal appeal.
Right, okay, so yes, as long as our statement of purpose covers what we're gonna talk about, we're okay.
Absolutely.
Thank
And
you.
I did not mean to cause confusion. You're absolutely correct. Yes.
That's why we signed that affidavit, agenda.
Right.
Well, the affidavit says we talked about what we said we were going to talk about. We didn't talk about it.
Absolutely.
True.
I saw a hand. Yes.
Yes. So you've talked about what would happen if you go into executive session to under one piece of it and you try to do 2 or 3, and that's wrong. What if you go in under one reason and then you never actually talk about anything that needed executive session? So in other words, you didn't actually do anything. So it's not from 1 to 2 or 3, it's from 1 to 0. Is that a problem?
Yes, it's a problem. If you said you were going to go into executive session and you get in there and you talk about Mrs. McGillicuddy's high heel shoes, that's not an appropriate topic for executive session. And so when you sign that affidavit, the affidavit says we talked about things that were appropriate for executive session.
Okay.
So you're in trouble.
Yeah, that actually triggers another one. What if most of that meeting was on topic, but then 2/3 of the way in it, I don't know, the conversation drifted off into somebody's, I don't know, somebody's marriage or something. Is that a problem? Most of it was right on, but then some of it just went out of bounds.
It's a major problem.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Executive session is exclusive for those topics that are listed in policy update. You are not supposed to talk about anything else. And
good.
it is incumbent on each of you to understand that and to call it out. So it's not just the board president.
Right.
A member should say, whoa,
So-
whoa, we can't talk about her marriage. We
Right.
can't talk about that. And if the board is going to continue doing that, then I'm going to excuse myself from executive session. And I want the record to so reflect.
Right. Okay.
So this is the concern that this is a challenge for me anyway. So I'm no longer chair of the superintendent's evaluation committee, but when I was chair, we would have our executive session for the purpose of talking about the evaluation of the superintendent, but it would also go heavily into discussions of the tool that we were using. And so the conflict that came out of that was, well, you can't really talk about the tool without talking about the person. And then you can't really talk about the tool in executive session. And so that is the big conflict that still hangs over my head, is the one thing that that I would be concerned about in terms of how do you balance that instrument versus the actual person, but you're talking about that instrument with a person in mind.
You should not be talking about the instrument with the person in mind. The instrument is generic.
Should
It's
be.
just like you have a right as the Board of Education to ask, how do we conduct performance evaluations for staff? That's generic. You're not going to ask about one particular principal or one particular teacher because that's not your job. But you do need to know what the process is about for evaluation. So you can and should discuss the instrument in public. You've got to make it generic. That instrument, it should be the same instrument you use for the second superintendent and the third superintendent. It's the instrument, okay? So you
Right.
gotta get away from the personality and make it work for the evaluation, and just recognize you want to tie it to your strategic plan.
Exactly, but yeah, oh, so that's a good one too. Our strategic plan is totally a public discussion, right?
Right.
Always.
Mhm.
So I agree. So yeah, I can see where there's a piece of a slippery slope there, but
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Yes, yes.
I,
Okay.
I did have one question about executive session that's unique to our current circumstances. In normal times, we shut the door, right? If we're in executive session, we shut the door and we're away from the public and away from everybody, right? It's just us as a board and whoever else is supposed to be in there. If it's the superintendent, except for superintendent discussions, et cetera. In the Zoom era, everybody's on their laptops, and some people have got headphones on, so it's probably, you know, they're the only ones hearing it. But it's a little bit like online testing for those of us that are teachers. Who's just off screen? Do I have a crowd here? Does anybody else have, you know, people that are listening in? How is a board supposed to ensure secrecy in the Zoom era of online meetings?
That's where you go into trust.
Okay.
The board has to build trust among the governance team. You should not have to worry, does that person have somebody else in the room?
Okay.
Is that person going to share the recording with? You know, the executive session component, that's where you would turn the recording off. But you all have got to, as a body, be able to trust each other, just as when you have executive session in person, you should believe that an individual is not going to leave that session and talk about what was discussed in executive session. Okay, you have to build that. And that is the foundation upon which the relationship of the board and the superintendent rests. It's mutual respect, mutual trust. And you just got to work on it. You've got
Okay.
to be able to
All right.
believe that.
So to follow up on that, there has to have been a time or a place somewhere in the United States where that trust didn't exist or was not built. Now, aspirationally, it should always happen. In the cases where it doesn't exist, what is a recourse? What has been a recourse?
Well, we haven't always been in this situation where we were limited to Zoom meetings, for one thing. But you all have to talk about it and recognize that I'm going back to that code of ethics. The code of ethics says maintain the confidentiality of all discussions and other matters pertaining to the board and the school system during executive session of the board.
Okay.
A member who breaches the confidentiality is going to be found out. And I will tell you, you all have a little bit more of a challenge because there are 9 of you. But as you get to know each other, when you leave an executive session and you get into the parking lot to get ready to go home and you get a phone call that asks you about something that happened in executive session, you know who told, and you know because each of you has a way of talking. There are certain words that you use, and you'll know. But the fact of the matter is that if someone breaches that confidentiality, then they are subject to the board handling it. And that's where it goes into that conflict of interest piece. And you all decide what it is that's going to take place. You can't remove someone from the board, but you can certainly make them uncomfortable.
So, okay.
Okay,
So that's great. So thank you. And so if we had a situation where within 30 minutes of an executive session, suddenly we're hearing from somebody that's clearly got some information, probably came from executive session. If we know, as you say, because people always have different language and so forth, if we know who that is, then that's where you would say that we should go to our policy BH, which is the state code, and look at the enumerated list of the things that are the code of ethics, and then follow that procedure. Is that correct?
Yes, I hate it for you because it's ugly and it's very uncomfortable, but that's what has to be done. So in the meantime, what you want to work on is establishing trust.
Okay.
Doing the right thing for the right reasons, and remembering it's not about you. Nope. It's about the children.
That's right. Thank you.
So I have a question, Zinda. Our board-elect members are allowed to ask questions, are they not?
And I was just going to say.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And here's something to remember. While they are board members elect, I saw in the policy that they receive all materials, etc., except executive session.
Right.
Except executive session, because you are called to a certain thing about confidentiality that they are not yet subject to until they're sworn in.
Right.
Okay. But yes, they can ask questions.
Okay, so it's their time to ask questions because we're almost over.
I know, I'm sorry. But I'll tell you what I will do. If there are questions after this, if you would send the questions either through your board president or send them directly to me, I'll make sure that the answers go to everybody. I don't have to say who asked the question, but that's the other thing to keep in mind. Anytime a board member asks a question, the answers should come back to everybody. The other thing that's really important is that all board members should receive the same information at about the same time. So please avoid counting votes. And what that means is, I know that it takes 5 votes for something to pass, so I don't call but 4 other people. That is wrong, wrong, wrong. Every board member needs to get the same information at about the same time. No surprises. Okay? Please remember that, and things can work out. We really are out of time. There were a couple of other motions I wanted to review. I'm not going to do it. I think we got the generics. Is there any other burning question that I can answer before I wave goodbye?
Well, okay, now that you got my brain all stimulated, thank you so much for everything. This was great. So we can get those questions to Lakeisha, and then she'll get them to you. Okay, that would be great.
Please do. I'll be glad to try to answer questions. I did have a little thing about teamwork. We'll have to do it next time. I apologize. I knew I was talking too much.
No, you aren't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Remember to sign the sign-in form, and know that the addresses that are on there are the addresses that GSBA has. So if there's something you want changed, draw a line through it and put in your own address. I will sign it afterwards. Please remember to submit your evaluation form.
Okay.
Okay, so
sign in and evaluation.
Right. Now, do we have the sign in, or do you have that?
I think I have.
And what you should do is pass it to each person, let them sign it, then scan it and send it back. Okay, because it's nothing confidential, you all. It's just your signature. And ultimately it'll come to me. I will sign it and send it back, so it'll be in your in the school district file.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this information. It is definitely helpful. And as someone mentioned, Ms. Bowie, you don't mind if we send you follow-up questions, it sounds like.
Absolutely not. And I think my email address is on the last. Yeah, there it is. Oops. Anyway, it's on the last slides.
Slide, okay.
Okay, so yes, I
Okay.
don't mind.
Okay.
Ms. Bowie,
Thank-
were you gonna give the baseball analogy at the end? I saw it in the PowerPoint.
I was going to, but I don't want to
Can
use.
you give it, can you give it, please? Just for all the board members, because that was a part of our new board member training.
All right. It's gonna take a minute.
Sorry.
I usually hold the baseball in my hand, but I left it downstairs. Okay. The relationship between the school board and the superintendent can be compared to that between a baseball pitcher and the catcher. The catcher has responsibility for watching the entire field of play, for knowing all the players on the opposing team who come up to bat. The catcher advises the pitcher as to what kind of pitch would be best based on what the pitcher knows about the batter. The pitcher decides to accept the catcher's recommendation or to shake off that recommendation in favor of a different pitch. Once there's a decision between them, the pitcher throws the pitch and the catcher reacts accordingly. The superintendent is the catcher. In public education ball game, we're not trying to get any player out. The batters are public school students, and our goal is to make sure they all get home. First base is elementary school, second base middle school, third base high school, and home plate is high school graduation. Infield players are the staff members working in the schools. Outfield players are those in the central office and support staff, bus drivers and others who work on behalf of the entire school district. The catcher, the superintendent, observes everything and is aware of what students need for success. He or she makes recommendations to the pitcher is the school board, about what pitch, that's the vote, policy, etc., is necessary to move the school district forward. The school board ultimately votes the way it chooses, that's throwing the pitch, and the superintendent responds to the pitch by implementing appropriate action. Hopefully, the decision or pitch will result in students getting around all the bases and across home plate to graduation, as well as giving those in the field what they need in order to do their jobs according to expectations. That's the goals and objectives in the strategic plan. When necessary, the catcher and pitcher meet on the mound for private conversation. That is executive session. And what is discussed on the pitcher's mound stays on the pitcher's mound. Now, this may not be a perfect analogy for the board superintendent relationship, but it may help picture how the relationship can be effective. Since the board is a singular entity with multiple components, we might think of the board vote like the hand holding the baseball. I don't have it in my hand, but pretend. If there is a 5-member board and only 3 members vote to support a recommendation, consider a ball held by 3 fingers in preparation for the pitch. Notice that all fingers on the hand go with the pitch, even if they aren't touching the ball. When action is taken, the school board speaks with one voice, even if the vote isn't unanimous. The end.
I like that. Thank you,
Thank
Linda.
you.
Thank
That
you.
was great.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Great.
God bless you all. I respect you for what you do. It's so important, and the kids need you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Great.
All right. Thank you all for attending. We are at a place of adjournment, so open the floor for a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second.
Okay. Second, okay.
Quick question. I tried
Yes.
to fill out the evaluation, but I'm not sure how to save it, and so I lost it.
Okay.
I can send another one.
No, I've got a blank copy, but I don't know, short of printing it out, filling it out, and scanning it in, I don't know how to do it.
If you want to, I plan on printing mine. So if we want to, at some point, sort of, if we need to leave it at the district office, or I know everyone may not have a scanner as well.
Right.
So if it may be easier for us to leave both things at the district office, or I don't know, put it on a desk outside so people can come up and socially distance sign it and complete their form. I think we can figure out a way to do it.
I
That
don't
is
need
a little
those
bit
right
shorter.
away. It's not,
Okay,
I just need them at some point.
at some point. Okay.
Okay?
Can we e-sign? Is e-signature software okay? If we just e-sign it or do a form field to send it back in, is that all right?
That will work for us.
Okay.
I'm gonna document that y'all were here.
Okay.
So who is Anderson?
Okay, so I haven't set up my
Does that-
e-signature yet, but okay, I can make myself do it.
Dr. Mumby,
Yes.
what is Anderson? What can you clarify your last name? I don't know if I have it on our sign-in sheet is incorrect.
No, well, my maiden name is Okundaye, but my married name
Okay.
is Anderson.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you have on your document, but I go by Anderson.
You go by Anderson. Okay. So we'll correct that. I think we had Okundaye on the form.
Yes, it's Okundaye.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. So, my apologies. I don't know how that happened.
I think I put, it was probably me. I think I put it on there and I should have asked first.
We can just add Anderson behind that. Well, whatever you want to do, whatever way you want it to appear is what we need to make that adjustment.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, all in favor, and I can't see my screen, so I'm gonna rely on individuals. I can only see one person at a time right now. But all in favor
Madam
of adjourn.
President, let me make a
Yes.
suggestion. When you get ready to adjourn the meeting, you can simply say, if there is no objection, and you pause. The meeting.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bowie. All right, well, if there is no objection, the meeting is adjourned.